Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. In this video we'll be looking at the digestive system, the organs of the digestive system, the functions of those organs and how some of those organs are adapted to carry out those functions. Before we get started, it's important to understand that there are two types of digestion. There is physical digestion and chemical digestion. Physical digestion occurs in the mouth, as I've circled, and this is where large pieces of food are broken down into small pieces of food by the mouth. This actually increases the surface area of the food pieces. And then chemical digestion, which occurs in the stomach and in the small intestine, and this is where the large insoluble food molecules like proteins, starches and fats are broken down into small soluble molecules. And this involves enzymes breaking down those molecules, as you can see in the diagram shown here. So what are the organs of the digestive system? Well, we have the mouth, the gullet, also known as the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine and the large intestine. So what's the function of each of these organs? Well, the mouth contains teeth which will grind and chop up the food into small pieces. And this will increase the surface area of the food so that enzymes can digest the food faster, and this is physical digestion. You do have chemical digestion which also occurs in the mouth because there are enzymes like amylase in the mouth which will break down starch. The gullet or the esophagus is a tube that links the mouth to the stomach, and that's just where your food travels down. It's relatively boring in terms of digestion. However, one interesting fact is that there is a flat muscle called the epiglottis, which is at the top of the gullet here, at top of the esophagus here, and the epiglottis will stop food from entering the lungs. So most of the time the epiglottis sits over the esophagus, but when you eat, when you swallow, it moves and sits over your trachea, preventing any food from going down into your lungs so that you don't choke. Once the food's travelled down the esophagus, it will enter the stomach. Now the stomach produces enzymes which will digest protein. Protein is the only food molecule that is digested in the stomach. No other nutrients are digested in the stomach, only proteins. The enzyme that's actually in the stomach is an enzyme called protease, and that will break down proteins into amino acids. The stomach also contains a stomach acid or hydrochloric acid, HCl for short, which will destroy any microorganisms which are found on your food. The next organ is the small intestine, and the small intestine produces a range of enzymes to digest proteins, carbohydrates and fats into the small molecules which are then absorbed into the body by diffusion and active transport. So those small molecules will move into the blood and be transported around the body by the blood to the cells and tissues that need them. Finally, the food will pass into the large intestine, and the large intestine will absorb water and store any undigested food as waste until it's time to pass out of the body through the anus. And that process is known as egestion. So it's very common in your exams to be asked questions about the small intestine and how the small intestine is adapted to its function. And they may well show you diagrams like the diagrams we have below here. Here you can see the tube that is the small intestine, and you can see the lining has a number of these structures that seem to move in and out. You can see a zoomed in version here. Those are known as villi or one villus. And in fact you can see one villus here, and you can see that it's actually made out of a layer of cells which are just one cell thick. You merely go through one cell before you reach the blood vessels here, which will carry the digested food molecules away. And indeed there is actually an extra section in the middle of this, which I'll colour in orange here, and this is known as a lacteal, which is useful for carrying away the digested fats, the fatty acids and the glycerol molecules. If you look at the individual cells that line the villus, you can see one here, and you'll see that they have these folded surfaces known as microvilli, and they have a large number of mitochondria. So if we have a look at a typical exam question, you might get a question like this. Glucose is absorbed into the blood in the small intestine by both diffusion and active transport. Use the diagram below, this diagram, to explain how the small intestine is adapted to its function of efficient absorption. So an answer for this question should include the following points. We should first think about diffusion and how we can speed up diffusion, and there are 3 ways to speed up diffusion. So we would have to mention that the villi and the microvilli are folded so that they produce a large surface area which will allow fast diffusion, so the nutrients will be absorbed faster into the blood. The villi have thin walls, just 1 cell thick, so that will give a very short diffusion distance and again allow fast diffusion of the products of digestion into the blood. Inside the villi there are capillaries, so the villi will have a very good blood supply, which will help to maintain the diffusion gradient, so we're always moving the nutrients from a high concentration to a low concentration. And again, this will allow a fast diffusion of the products of digestion into the blood. There is a lacteal, which will absorb fatty acids and glycerol. That particular point is very important if you're studying Edexcel. It is less important as if you study AQA because it's not on that syllabus. The cells that line the villi are known as epithelial cells, and those cells also contain many mitochondria, and these mitochondria will provide a large amount of energy, ATP, because they carry out a large amount of respiration. The ATP can therefore be used in active transport, which will help absorb the nutrients when they are in a very low concentration in the small intestine, so we can absorb absolutely every single nutrient and we don't waste anything. There are 3 other organs that we need to consider, which are technically not part of your digestive system, but they work with your digestive system so closely that I'm going to include them here. We have to think about the liver. The liver is this large reddish organ here. We have to consider the pancreas. Now the pancreas is sort of this organ that's just hiding behind the stomach there. And we have to consider the gallbladder, which is just below the liver here, and I'll circle in green. Now a diagram like the one on the left here can sometimes be a little confusing. So the diagram on the right shows the same organs, but just a little bit more clearly. For example, here is the gallbladder. Organ P is the stomach, which we've already discussed. Here is the liver, and just below the stomach, this is our pancreas. So what are the functions of those 3 organs? Well, if we start with the liver, after the nutrients are absorbed into the blood from the small intestine, they are taken directly to the liver, and some of the nutrients are processed. For example, glucose, any excess glucose can be stored as the carbohydrate glycogen. The liver will also break down toxins like alcohol, and any excess amino acids will be broken down, deanimated to form urea. And that urea will be combined with water and excess salts to form urine, which you will store in your bladder and then excrete. The liver also produces bile. Now that bile will be stored in the gallbladder, which is just below the liver. So the gallbladder will store the bile and then secrete it into the start of the small intestine. This is very important because bile is an alkali, and therefore it will neutralize the stomach acid. And that means that the pH will be the optimum pH for the enzymes in the small intestine. Bile is also an emulsifier, and it will help to break down fat by increasing the surface area of the fat droplets. In effect, it's allowing the fat and the water to mix, because fat and water don't normally mix. So with the bile, it's allowing them to mix, so we get many small droplets of fat, increasing the surface area. Now sometimes you do get gallstones which can form and block the bile duct, and this can prevent bile from reaching the small intestine and therefore affect digestion. For example, we won't be able to neutralize the stomach acid, the pH will be far too low, and that will denature a number of the enzymes in the small intestine, which means that you won't have efficient digestion, so you won't be able to absorb the nutrients from your food. The third organ we need to consider here is the pancreas. Now the pancreas will produce enzymes, in particular amylase, which breaks down starch, lipase, which breaks down fat, and trypsin, which is a particular type of protease which will break down proteins. So these enzymes are produced by the pancreas, and the pancreas will secrete them directly into the start of the small intestine here, and therefore allowing your food molecules to be digested effectively and efficiently. The pancreas also makes a hormone called insulin, which works with the liver to regulate your blood glucose levels. I hope that you have enjoyed watching this video on the digestive system. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know what you've learnt in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching.